But from your piece, it seems like the conclusion that I got from it, at the very least, is that if Ukraine is successful in thwarting this invasion, especially through the help of civilian resistance, armed resistance to Russian military operations, that could inspire other European nations, especially those with borders to Russia, to adopt similar policies on civilian gun ownership. Is that the basic idea that you're mentioning here?
Yeah, because Russia is, I guess sticking with Ukraine here, Russia is looking at a country that has had 3 revolutionary events over the last 30 years. All of them, whenever they had a leader who was kind of going off the constitutional path or getting too dictatorial, they overthrew. And there were times, most famously Maidan 8 years ago, when firearms came into that equation. And Russia knows if they do attempt to, subdue this country, that they're going to have to deal with a population that is very used to using firearms and to defend themselves and to overthrow oppressors. Which kind of, you could almost see a hint of that even today when the Kremlin's spokesperson said one of their, let's say, conditions of Ukraine's surrender would be that Ukraine de-weaponize. And while you could take that as no military, it's also patently obvious that they would de-arm the civilian population, because while Putin's strength isn't as weak as we would like to think it is, it's not overwhelming. The Russian economy is going to be in tatters. If they then also have to deal with their soldiers kind of coming back wounded or worse from a really heavily armed insurgency, people aren't going to like that. That's what helped to end the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, was an armed insurgency, and the Russians are very aware of that. And so that's going to be one of the things they will try to kind of renege on, is to take back the guns. And so you do see countries which are usually lauded by the American right wing, like Poland or Hungary, which are extremely restrictive when it comes to firearms. It's very difficult to get a permit. If you go into a police station there and say, hey, I would like a permit for self-defense, you're kind of going to laugh you out of it. You might see them kind of looking over the border and saying like, oh, hey, again, if an insurgency is successful, we'll see. And you almost certainly would see some sort of shift there. It would be hard. They'd be hard pressed to avoid that.
Right. And I will say that clearly thus far, you've seen a lot of Ukrainians who are willing to fight, including civilians. We've had reporting from multiple outlets talking to people in Ukraine, New York Times, Newsy, several local outlets there spoke to people who are really training for exactly this scenario that's unfolded. And, here's a quote from, this is a clinical research doctor who was talking to the New York Times, name's Marta Yuskiv. I apologize for the pronunciation, but they said, quote, "We have a strong army, but not strong enough to defend against Russia. If we are occupied, and I hope that doesn't happen, we will become the national resistance." And then another person they spoke with, the Times, 56-year-old advertising executive, Ihor Gribanoshko. I, again, apologize for the pronunciation, but he said, the more coffins we send back, the more Russian people will start thinking twice. So it seems that there are certainly people who, in Ukraine itself, who understand exactly what you're talking about here and agree with the basic concept of armed resistance to this invasion. I believe the Ukrainians are trying to recruit several 100,000 volunteers, civilian volunteers, to join what they're calling territorial defense forces, which, and I guess going back to your earlier point, this is not really a new thing in Ukraine. After the revolution in 2014, the fighting that initiated this invasion, or was sort of the center, the piece, or the focus of this up until Putin decided to invade the entire country, but the fighting near the Russian border, a lot of that was done in the early days by civilian volunteer forces. And those forces have now been sort of formalized as part of the Ukrainian military. And that's what the territorial defense forces are. And so they've been training people in how to, create IEDs, set explosives, shoot rifles, coordinate with one another in a more cohesive unit. And you've seen pictures out of Ukraine where people are flocking to these recruitment centers that they've set up for these groups. And so I think it's clear that there is quite a bit of appetite for this kind of resistance in Ukraine. Do you think that's fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the ironies, there's a saying in Russia, the irony of fate, and one of the ironies of the fate that has kind of befallen Ukraine is that in an attempt to kind of get Ukraine to agree to his demands, Putin instigated the war in the East for the last 8 years. But in doing so, a lot of Ukrainians received military training, and they learned how to teach military training to others. Now, which is, you can even see now, as of the current time in the fighting, the area where Ukraine is strongest is in the East. It's not in the South or in the North. It's in the East, where they've been fighting, where they're used to fighting. And that kind of way of thinking has really gotten into the population. The first time I was ever in the country was 2018, and I was there for a conference on arms control, and we were talking about missiles. And I remember a guy had to leave early, and I was like, "Oh, where are you going?" He said, "Oh, these missiles we're talking about." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, I have to fire them at the Russians." And so you have, and he was someone my age. He was attending a college seminar, and he was going and could kind of take his turn there. And so you have this really. People are used to the idea of war. They're not, there's a lot of Europeans, and I say this, with love for Europe, a lot of Europeans who have pretty much only seen guns in movies, and Ukrainians have not. They're used to this, and they're ready for this. You have a lot of militias, some which have received some controversy in the Western press, but are generally speaking respected in Ukraine, which have really trained people for free and shown people how to fight. And they're not kind of, LARPing kind of people who just, buy expensive, tactical gear and they know what they're doing. They're effectively, an unofficial part of the Ukrainian forces. And those are all going to be spread throughout the population, even if Russia is able to get to Kyiv and says that they've have a new president, something like that. These people are still going to be there. So it's not just going to be kind of a simple matter of, oh, now you have a new president and everyone's just going to deal with it.